Are those all valid questions?
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me. And yes, they are. This has been that was a stunning display, I think, that we saw this morning from both President Trump, who used this opportunity to deliver his standard campaign style stump speech, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who just repeated his very familiar litany of culture war issues that he has made his hallmark. I have yet to find a single military official who was in the audience today who thought that this was a good presentation. All I've had from them so far, from the people I've talked to, is a combination of disbelief that they were made to fly, some of them from Asia, from around the world, from bases in Europe and in even Africa, all the way to Quantico in Virginia, to listen to the same very familiar type of woke culture war complaints that we've been having since President Trump was reelected and since Pete Hegseth took over the running of the Defense Department. And you just saw that all over again this morning. Nothing that was said today could not have been put in an email or in a directive. So there's that to begin with. There's also the fact that so much of this was partisan, and this is a military that is supposed to present itself as nonpartisan. So you didn't hear the kind of cheering that we usually get, because President Trump is used to playing for the type of crowds that favor him. And so he's not very used to performing in front of an audience that's just looking back stone faced. But that's what you were getting from these generals. But I've gotten so many emails from women in the military who think that this was yet another, as if they needed it again. They've heard this for months now. Another example of the fact that they believe that they are not welcome.
Do we know how much it cost to fly in all those generals and military leaders?
I haven't been able to. I would love to be able to tell you. It's hard to figure out because they were coming from all of these different places, and there's so many different people involved. At the end of the day, the Pentagon claims it's not that big a cost, but you and I both know what airfare is, and in some cases they were flying in military planes and American planes. In some cases, people came commercial. So it's. I don't know what it costs, but it's definitely in excess of millions.
Yeah, my parents had a helicopter. I know jet fuel is really expensive. That was back in the 90s. It's only more expensive now.
Your parents had a helicopter?
They did. They were news reporters in a helicopter. But I'll leave that aside. Tom Nichols, what I was concerned about, what I thought about when Pete Hegseth was giving that speech was not so much the woke culture war stuff, which I expect. It's the consequences of trying to go after the woke culture war and what gets wrapped up in that. The military has had a problem with sexual assault. It's been a longstanding problem and one that leaders have tried to address. When he's talking about not derailing careers, not listening to the complainers, I wondered, does that send a message to women? If you're assaulted, no one wants to hear it.
It sends a message to everybody. It says if your leader is a toxic jerk whose command is a mess, and you're trying to complain to the IG or to warn your superiors that you have a leader who's somehow off the rails and behaving inappropriately, because this is about more than just women. I mean, basically, Hegseth said, if you are a toxic leader, don't worry, I've got your back. And I think part of that is because the one person Pete Hegseth is tired of people smearing, in his mind, is Pete Hegseth, because the building keeps leaking about what a hot mess Pete Hegseth's Pentagon is. I think that the point of putting all those people in a room was to generate video clips of bold, tough alpha guy Pete Hegseth reading the Riot Act to all of these admirals and generals, many of whom, as I've pointed out many times, were officers when Pete Hegseth was still in high school, and to say, no more wokeism, no more complaining. We don't want to hear anything from, the women. We don't want to hear anything about bad leaders. We don't want, and by the way, in case people are wondering about the beard issue, the men can't have beards because of a shaving exception for a medical condition that falls heavily on black men. The targets of all of this were very clear. It was that Pete Hegseth wants it to be, the Defense Department to be a club, a kind of a frat, and everybody else isn't welcome. I mean, it was really an embarrassing, cringe-inducing speech, but it's pretty much what you'd expect from the most unqualified Secretary of Defense in American history.
And what about the other significant question I have, Mark, about the war crimes? Hegseth was a vocal advocate for a number of soldiers who were accused or convicted of war crimes. And when he's saying that there's not going to be these complaints, there's not going to be these legal tie-ups, I wonder, does it also send a message, much like in the sexual assault way? And tell me if you think I'm going too far. For soldiers who see wrongdoing out there on the battlefield, soldiers who are worried that their fellow soldiers are going too far and maybe crossing a line into committing a war crime.
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a good question. I disagree with most of the answers on everything else that was said. But the issue of war crimes is one of good order and discipline. Good units don't go out in combat and make the kind of war crime inducing actions that would cause them to be arrested, which would cause them to be prosecuted. I think that was one area where I disagree with Pete Hegseth in terms of going beyond the Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions have stood for decades as our left and right limits of how to operate on the battlefield. I don't think that we should be somehow changing those. All the other issues that have been discussed at this point, I take a different view from.
So tell me what your different view is.
Well, first of all, I did not hear him say anything about wanting to change equal rights, using your words. I've talked to a number of people today about that speech, and while they had many things to say about Pete Hegseth's style and demeanor, I didn't find too many that truly disagreed with his focus on combat readiness and ending some of these culture wars that have been inflicted upon the military. Last, I think that whole issue about flying officers back to Quantico and trying to argue that it's too much of an expense. We have commanders' conferences at every level. The U.S. Army has four-star conferences where they believe to bring the four stars from all over the world to talk. Same thing with the Navy, same thing with the Air Force. Central Command brings all of its combatant commanders from the Middle East back to Tampa for these kind of meetings. So while it was unprecedented that this would be done by a Secretary of Defense, it is done by every other layer of the chain of command, and I've attended weeks and weeks of these kind of face-on-face meetings in 30 years in the military.
And talking about equal rights, I mean, that's what Pete Hegseth said in just the first soundbite I played. He said, we're doing the same with equal opportunity in military, equal opportunity policies. The EO and the MEO
I
at our
agree.
department.
There's a difference between EO and equal rights. And that's what I think he was trying to come out and say. The equal opportunities sometimes have been weaponized, as has the IG at times. There's been a lot of weaponization of the complaints process. Not a week ago, I was in the Middle East, and I had some officers say they don't want to command units because every private in the unit can write a Facebook post saying that his commander did something that he didn't like, and the next thing you know, you have the IG flying down and doing an investigation. Look, I agree completely with the IGs going after clear violations of Army regulations, but the fact that in many cases you see the IG process being weaponized against senior commanders and junior commanders simply because the people don't like either the person or the standards that he or she is trying to uphold.
Let me ask you about the politics of today. Do you think it's appropriate for the president to give what is a pretty standard political speech and political rally speech that he gives lots of different places in front of the military like that, in front of those assembled generals?
Yeah, again, I've been in meetings with presidents in my Army career. Those meetings were usually straightforward and focused on the facts. I don't necessarily agree that that type of meeting should be an opportunity for partisan discussions. Let's focus on warfighting. Let's focus on the issues of readiness, the issues of operations. I agree with you in this case that President Trump probably had an opportunity to focus on those issues, operation readiness, recruiting, rather than some of the issues that he brought up.
Mark, let me get you in on this. You've been reporting on this administration, obviously on Donald Trump for a long time now. How does this fall into the vision that Donald Trump has for the military? He even mentioned today that a lot of the folks in the crowd look like they came out of central casting, which we've reported on in the past is something that Donald Trump believes works for him when he's trying to place people into positions of power.
Yeah, no, he loves the central casting thing. He was in a position today where people who he envisions that way would theoretically be applauding for him. I think it was pretty jarring to him that he was not applauded in that crowd, because I think he's used to be applauding, he's used to being applauded. And I think he probably saw this as a home field advantage for himself, which I think might have disappointed him to some degree. I do agree with a lot of what Tom said earlier, especially about the visual, the idea of having so many military commanders coming together so that this could be conceived as a kind of a pep rally that ultimately wasn't. But there is, I think, probably some value in getting everyone into the same room. I think he probably would have liked to have been more boisterous, but you obviously could not have achieved that through a Zoom or through an email or anything like that. I mean, I do wonder whose idea this whole thing was and how they think it went. I also would be very curious to know, and Helene got to this a little bit earlier, what the chit chat was sort of on the sidelines before and after the speech, what the rank and file, what the military, what the generals were saying to each other about what they were being made to do.